So good morning again to everybody. So I'll just begin with a little early March anecdote. back, back years ago, I used to have what we called like Zen and deep ecology retreats, where we go to various places in the Maine woods and spend a couple of days. And at least my perception, they were very enjoyable, and I think people got a lot out of them. But anyway, so I used to do one in February or mid-February, late February, because I wanted to get where the days were getting a little bit longer rather than the really dark days of December and January, which really limited how much we could kind of do on the trips. Um, but hit some bad weather a couple of years, so I said, okay, I'm going to move the trip later. I'm going to move it to the beginning of March, which is why this story is relevant today. And I did that. It was the year that my teacher, Steph, had died. He died in September, and it was now beginning of March. And Margaret decided that she wanted to join us. She had never done any of these, but I think she was looking to make more connection and get herself. She was pretty depressed following Steph's passing. I think she was hoping to get herself moving again. So one of the members of the Sangha, Sheila Kennedy, Sheila's still around someplace. I don't know where she is. But anyway, she took Margaret to LL Bean's and got her outfitted. So Margaret had what she needed. She had long underwear, which she never had, and also got like the best down bag that Beans had to offer. I don't know if it was, 20 below, 30 below bag, whatever, but that sort of thing. And the day that the trip began, Sheila and I, and there was a young man, Louis, who was living at the Zen Center at the time. We went on ahead. Margaret was going to come later with her own vehicle. Okay, so we went up to the Bigelow Range. I don't know if people know the Bigelow Range in Maine, up near Stratton, Maine. And there was a place I knew there where we could, the road that went back into the woods. We went back into the woods about a mile and found a place to set up our camp and gather our wood for the night and all that stuff. Set up, put the tent up, obviously, and the tent I had a big tent in those days. It had a little sheet metal wood stove going in it, and so we got there in the afternoon, and it was windy, and the temperature was dropping. And sort of making the long story short, by nightfall, it was 0 degrees, and there were wind gusts, probably 30, 35 miles an hour. And that continued all night long. The tent just shaking and blowing and like that. And so I pretty much stayed up all night to keep the fire stoked, although everybody had a good down bag, so they were pretty comfortable. And we had Margaret's dog with us. Margaret had a dog, a big lab named Molly. We had Molly with us. And we got through the night. Um, yeah, we got through the night, and the following morning the wind calmed down, and we had a nice breakfast, and we snowshoed out and all that. But it taught me about the vagaries of early March, and not to assume that spring is necessarily on the way yet. So But what I wanted to talk about, at least initially this morning, is hope. Now, hope is an interesting concept, an interesting word, and it's yet again one of those words we don't typically see or we almost never see in Buddhist context. Hope is not a Buddhist word. Why? Because to hope connotes some degree of attachment to a certain outcome, to reality unfolding in a certain way. I hope they will be safe. I hope it will be good, and so on and so forth. It's part of our language, something that we say all the time. And when times are difficult and stressful and so on, something that we are even more likely to invest ourselves in saying and thinking, oh, I hope this is going to come out all right. I hope things are going to get better. I hope they're going to survive, whatever it is. And again, strictly in Buddhist terms, we would say that's inviting suffering. Anytime that we want a certain outcome, whether we want reality to unfold in a particular way, that's an attachment. And that's a double-edged sword, because if it doesn't come out the way we want it to, we may have disappointment, we may have sadness, depending on kind of how strong the attachment is. We might be disconsolate, we might just be, miserable because God knows, maybe we had some loved one who was dying of cancer. We hoped for their survival and it didn't happen. And we're just torn apart. you know. And on the other hand, if the thing hoped for thing happens, then we may find ourselves overjoyed and attached to the joy. And it's like, oh, I'm so happy now because of this outcome. And those who've experienced that joy is very short-lived. And it extinguishes quickly. And once again, we're losing something. Once again, we can be attached to that joy, to that good feeling, to that happiness. But it's quickly gone. And once again, we can be introducing pain and suffering into our life. So that is what I would call the classic Buddhist perspective on hope. Don't have it. It will only cause us some degree of pain in the end, regardless of whether it's a positive or a negative outcome. And yet, I think many of us, if not most of us, would find it very hard to live without any hope. Psychologically speaking, hope is often important. It can keep us going through a difficult period of time. And sometimes things can look awfully bleak if we don't feel that we have any hope. So we have a bit of a dilemma. we adhere to a more traditional Buddhist stance and forsake all hope in the expectation of lessening our suffering? Or do we retain some hope because, at least in the short run, that psychologically buoys us and may keep us going through a dark and difficult period in our lives? I think it's a sort of a dilemma that all of us who are Buddhist practitioners are facing to a greater or lesser degree right now. So, what I would like to suggest is a third possibility, and that's the possibility of having some hope, but holding it lightly, not forming a deep attachment, not getting fully invested in it, but in holding it as one of the possibilities that we can foresee. And again, Zen tells us we can't foresee anything, right? We know that. When we think we know what's coming, we don't know what's coming. Every once in a while, coincidentally, it does happen. But typically, it's a delusion to think that we know what's coming in the future. And again, Zen would suggest don't try to know what's coming in the future. Don't project out there because we don't know. We don't ever know. And once, even things that seem certain are not certain. If we think probabilistically, then we might say, yes, it's highly probable. It's close to certain. But whatever outcome we expect is never certain. It's interesting because we constantly live in that space of holding on to certainties. Whether the assumption is implicit or explicit. I have my little appointment book. I have a whole bunch of things scheduled for tomorrow with the implicit assumption that I'm going to be alive and well tomorrow. Now, in terms of probabilities, it might be a pretty good one, but it's far from a certainty. And it may be necessary to operate that way, right? I mean, I can't say to everybody that I'm going to have an appointment. Well, sorry, I can't make an appointment with you today because I may not be alive tomorrow. So if you want to wait and check back with me tomorrow, if I'm still breathing, we can have a meeting, right? Just it's not very pragmatically useful. So we constantly make these assumptions. And in a sense, we are constantly hoping. And it may even be impossible to live without a certain amount of that. I think it is. It's March now. People are starting to plan spring and summer vacations. But if we were being really honest, we wouldn't plan them because we wouldn't know whether we'd be able to go on them. So we're constantly making assumptions, and many of those assumptions are based on what would be our hope. My hope will be I'll be here this summer and able to go on a vacation. So our practice was developed in South Asia with monks and nuns who did nothing else but practice. It was their entire life. that begging for food, a few basic things that were essentially part of their practice life. They didn't have lives in the community. They didn't have families. They didn't have jobs. And so being able to shed all hope, to live totally in the present without any attachment to outcomes, I won't say it was easy. It's never easy, but it was feasible. It was doable in their context. In our context, I would suggest it's not doable. Hence, this thing I'm talking about is kind of a middle way of having it, but holding it very lightly. Having some attachment, but not attaching deeply and clinging. That's where the suffering and pain are really introduced, when we're clinging, when we're holding really tightly. And then we're disappointed. We don't get the outcome that we were looking for. And that can be quite painful. I'm sort of debating whether I'm going to dive off this particular limb or not, but yeah, I'm going to take a little plunge off it and say, and furthermore, is our Zen practice today about eliminating our suffering? That was very much the practice focus of the early Buddhists. Eliminating their personal suffering, liberating themselves. And when they realized that, when they reached the stage that they called arhats, they went off into the forest. They went off to a cave someplace and maintained their lives, their meditation for the duration. Is that who we as Zen practitioners are today? Is our Zen practice solely focused on mitigating our suffering? And so is that, even as this whole question about hope, even as important as it was once? Is it okay if we feel some pain, if we are able to look at it, acknowledge it, and live with it? Pain is inevitable in our lives. Physical pain, emotional pain, number of types of pain, inevitable in our lives. So is our task to avoid pain, or is our task to learn to live with the pain? To go forward and live fully and deeply, not in spite of the pain, but with the pain. Now, there's often a paradox that occurs that when we do that, the pain does go away. It's an unintentional, paradoxical thing. used to experience this back in the day when we sat long periods and had a lot of pain in our legs, our low back, our upper back, all over the place. But if we really bead with the pain, if we allowed the pain to fully permeate our consciousness, and we were no longer separate from the pain often disappeared for a while anyway. And then we realized that it disappeared, and then we started thinking about it, and it came back. But there's that paradox. So that I believe that the struggle, the anguish that we feel, the difficulty that we feel, comes not from pain, not from suffering. Well, suffering is a little different, but not from pain, but from our rejection of the pain, from our refusal to acknowledge that it is part of our life and something that we need to live with, just like all of the other parts of our life. Antoine said, the great way is not difficult, only avoid picking and choosing. We are constantly picking and choosing. There are the things I like, the things I want. There are the things I dislike and the things I don't want. And we don't get to write the script. Those things are constantly there, both positive and negative. So now maybe I'm arguing against the concept of hope, saying, okay, what Zen is saying, whatever is, and we need to live with that, and we need to be that, and we need to embrace that, even the things we don't like. Because we do, when we do that, the dislikes dissolve. They're sustained by the tension that we create when we try to push things away, or we try to ignore them, or we try to work around them in some way. So in some way, I'm now, kind of talking out of both sides of my mouth, which I do often. Um, you know, but I don't believe it's wrong to hope, as long as we don't cling to that hope, as long as we don't attach deeply to that hope, as long as it rides in the surface of our consciousness but doesn't consume us. But at the same time, the more that we are able to live with whatever is in this moment without picking and choosing, more perhaps peace and contentment that we're going to experience. We are the seeds of our own discontent. Or we sow the seeds of our own discontent. So that's our challenge. Hold lightly any resistance to this moment and live fully with the moment, regardless of whether we think it's good, bad, or indifferent. It's the only one we've got. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. I think that's a good topic for these days. And your talk raised a few questions for me, or talking points maybe. One is when you had mentioned, that you hope, and if a loved one has an illness, you hope that they will get better. And and it seems like to some degree, hope is hope springs into our consciousness without us really having much control over it. Um, is it kind of like anger that, yes, maybe you can analyze your angry feelings and not behave in an angry way, or you can use skillful means, but the fact that something immediately causes that human emotion of anger, I don't think you can get rid of that. And I don't know that you can really get rid of that spring of hope that sometimes hits us. And um, and the other part of that sort of goes to the serenity prayer that um, hope can spring you into action to actually do something that you do have control over and accept accept the other. Um, so I, I so I guess my to summarize it, it's like, can we even avoid having hope? And can't it really be used for good purposes? And since I'm on, I'll also mention another. You used the word resist, and and I'm finding with all of the resistance messages that are around, um, I'm having difficulty with resistance because I know that in the past when I have resisted something that I don't have control over, it's a wonderful burden lifted when I can let go of that. And I don't know if opposition is a better word, but it's been something that I've been thinking about with the vocabulary of the current day. Uh, so just
Okay, which of the 72 good points that you made would you like me to respond to? I guess I don't even know where to begin. Um, any emotion can arise on its own. Anger is a particularly powerful one. Hope can arise, right? We don't necessarily have to invite the emotions in for them to arise, but we always have the option of letting them go. And so to say we can't get rid of anger, no, we can't get rid of anger. It just sometimes it's just a long process and not an easy process. And we may have to let go of it 10,000 times. We may have to do things. We may have to do, I don't know what, atonement, or we may, we kind of, engage in things that help us let go of the anger. So it may not be a thing that, excuse me, that we can easily get rid of, but it's something that we certainly can work on. And simultaneously coming to peace with the anger. What I'm talking about, that where anger becomes really problematic is when I release it on others or I turn it inward on myself. That's one of the ideas, is that that's where depression originates, is when we sort of repress our anger and bring it inward. So then the next question is, are there, like, whether it's anger, whether it's hope, are there creative ways which we can deal with it? No, through art. through various expressive means and allow it to naturally dissipate. And that might be, that may be a long and arduous process, but I don't believe it's impossible. And at the end of the day, there's maybe some that we say, okay, here it is, and I can live with it. I can deal with it because it's within the bounds of what I can handle in terms of my reality. So the same with the joy. The joy may arise naturally. Of course it does, in all kinds of situations. If we have a newborn baby in the family, of course we're going to be joyful, right? In that moment, how can you look on the face of that baby and not light up? So I think again we sort of got to take some perspective on it. Is first of all, is that a problem? Is that harmful? Is that going to hurt us? You know, I think the baby example is a good one because chances are we're going to continue to love that baby, and it's not, you know, it says, oh, give it up. Don't love that baby. Don't have feelings towards it. Don't have hope for it to grow into a wonderful human being. I think those are aspects of our humanity that are essential. Is it a problem? I don't know. My God, if something happened to that child, would we be devastated? Yes. Should we be devastated? Yes. Right? When I think at times there's a tendency to kind of mingle Buddhism with sociopathy. You know, if Gary is here, I'd have him tell the story again of, oh no, I'm blanking her name, that he loved so much, who's crying at the funeral. And
Sewell.
Sewell, yes, thank you. And people are dismayed. Why would this Buddhist adept, why would this master be in tears? And yet this was her granddaughter's funeral. Of course she was in tears. Unless we're sociopaths, we're going to be in tears.
Hey Peter, could I just oh I'm sorry, are you
Go ahead.
I didn't know if you were done talking. I'm sorry. Um I just want to make this comment now because I have to run to visit one of my kids at university. But um what you're saying resonates. Uh but I want to go back to pain for a minute because I think it attaches to what you're talking about. Or so I have like I've had both my hips replaced in my 40s. I've had back surgery where I have neuropathy in my feet, which can be painful. I have ankylosing spondylitis in my back, and I still ride a bike. I still work out at the gym. I still do all that stuff. So, but dealing with it on a daily basis is can be challenging sometimes. So, how do you deal with that pain? And the question has been, since I've been in this practice, has been, you know, who am I in relationship to the pain? So when you sit, the questions arise, am I the pain? Um, do I want the pain to stop? Would I hope for the pain to stop? But where I've come to, and you can tell me what you think about this, is it leads back to a question in the practice around, or am I just the aware space that's noticing the pain? And what I mean by that is that when you sit and you practice, um, I don't know how to put this into words, but there's kind of like this realization that, or maybe it's a question that you're the aware space that is aware of the pain, and then you let it in. And when you do that, um, you kind of get a glimpse into I don't know if it's like who you are, the nature of it, or whether feelings of frustration with it or anger or hope or whatever you want to call it, as they flow in to your perspective, it keeps going back to that awareness. So the awareness, the recognition that, or the question around the recognition that, am I just the aware space of what that pain is, can be um, helpful, releasing, transformative. I don't know quite the word is, but does that make sense what I'm saying?
Yes, I think so. You know, I again we have these default settings. One of them is that somehow we believe we should have to be able to be free of pain. Now, as you have learned, that's not that's not often not true, right? Pain is inherent in our lives. Some people more, some people less. If we live long enough, we're all going to have a fair amount of pain, at least intermittently. And but that sort of flies in the face of this assumption that somehow we should be pain free, and that's where the added pain comes from. That's where the suffering comes from. Rather than, at least as I'm hearing you do this, you're embracing that pain as part of your life. You're not complete, you know. And by the way, you know, there's a lovely story I haven't told in a while, and I'll tell it kind of quickly. I recently mentioned that Nine-Handed Dragon River book to a couple of folks, and this story is in the book. It's when Peter Matheson was in Tibet, um, doing the field work for the snow leopard book with his biologist friend. And they went and visited a tiny monastery way up on a precipice high in the Himalayas. And the path to the monastery was such that you had to go in single file. It was a very narrow, precipitous path. And Peter got there, and when he requested to have a an audience with the head lama of the monastery, and and it, so that was granted, and Peter went in to talk with him, and he was a very old man, and he was sitting with his legs crossed, and he didn't have a nice fleece like this. He had some kind of an animal blanket on his legs, and it's not animal blanket, but animal hide blanket. Anyway, at some point in the interview and discussion, Peter realized that this man's legs were completely atrophied. And because of that, it meant that he could never leave this remote mountain place because the path was so steep and so narrow that nobody could carry him down. There was no way. I suppose maybe they could have come in with a helicopter or something, but basically, there was no way this man could ever leave this little monastery. And Peter asked him, he right out, he said, well, you know, how do you feel about that? How are you doing with being, you know, stuck up in here in this place? And the old man said, he said, actually, it's wonderful. I can sit here in the afternoon and I can watch I don't know if they're sheep or goats, but watch the animals playing on the slopes in the late afternoon sun. He said, it gives me so much pleasure. And besides, I have no choice. So he was completely at home with the reality of his life. You know, back to the Serenity Prayer, the part that he could not change. Now, most of us would have probably suffered because of that, you know? Oh man, I'll never go to Applebee's again. I'm laughing at Spaniard's dog. Sorry. Is that a lab? Yeah. Okay. Good man. Got a lab. Okay. Anyway, you know, that wasn't what he was thinking. He was not thinking about all the things in life he couldn't have. He was focused on what he could have. He was focused of living completely within this very limited context of this tiny cliffside monastery. So maybe we're all living like that. Only some of our monasteries are bigger than others, right? But we're all living within the limitations of our lives. We are all living a human life that is mortal. We are all living a human life in which we get sick, and all living a human life in which we have pain. That's our little monastery up on the cliff. So the challenge is, can we enjoy watching the sheep play on the slopes around us in the late afternoon sun? Going back, our ancestors, there are records of some of our Zen ancestors, and I'm not going to remember who this is, but one who, for example, had stomach cancer, and of course in those days had no medication, extremely painful form of cancer, came in the Zendo every day until he died, and died on the cushion in the Zendo amidst this extreme pain. So there are other possibilities also. Daido Roshi, when we were in a retreat and people were having a lot of pain and getting, you could kind of squirming around in the Zendo and stuff, you could kind of tell. He used to say, "Sit still, you may have cancer someday." Well, which is just lovely. Well, anyway, Daido did. He died of lung cancer, and I'm curious whether he ever took pain meds or not. I don't know. So we also have, to some extent, we have to reckon with these things in our own way. If he did take pain meds, would that be wrong? If he didn't take pain meds, would that be wrong? Whatever choice he made the choice appropriate to his life in that moment, in those circumstances. Thinning out the crowd here. Any final thoughts or questions? My final thought here is just that at any moment, I think that our task is to do the best we can with the cards that we're dealt, with the circumstances, most of which are beyond our control, in spite of our delusions that we have control over them. And I think that's what Zen is all about. doing the best we can with what we have, whatever that is. You know, there's this the saying that nirvana and samsara are right here. Essentially, no, samsara is not hell. Samsara is this messy reality. It's not a, nirvana is not separate from this entire mess. But until we engage like that Tibetan monk, we won't see it. If we're always wanting things to be different, we won't see it.
Creations are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to put an end to them. Reality is boundless. I vow to perceive it. The enlightened way is unsurpassable. I vow to embody it. Creations are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to put an end to them. Reality is boundless. I vow to perceive it. The enlightened way is unsurpassable. I vow to embody it. Creations are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to put an end to them. Reality is boundless. I vow to perceive it. The enlightened way is unsurpassable. I vow to embody it.
This week. Oh, okay. Thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your Sunday.